All right, now we're recording. So, yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that. And I have seen a lot of students in my classes write to me saying that I don't think any of them have said that they had it, but they say that they've been potentially exposed, which is probably what happened with Anthony if all his friends got COVID. And so they got to be under quarantine. And so obviously, if your life fits that description, then, just please be patient and please do your best under quarantine. Join us in the Zoom room. I think part of it is we're testing more. I don't know. What do you guys think? Last semester we didn't test as much, right? Now you guys have to test every 2 weeks. Is that right? Was that the case last semester too? Once a month last semester? Yeah. So maybe cases are a little bit higher. I feel like the weekly email always like, oh, don't worry, it's very low, 1 or 2%, whatever. And so I don't know, but my own students seem to be getting affected more in the last week or two. So please, just please be careful. If you're feeling unwell, just stay home, join the Zoom room. That's what a lot of people are doing these days anyway. Yeah, it seems like it's safer, right? But you can never judge on these large trends because even if there are only a few hundred cases in the city, if we happen to have a little bubble in our school, then whatever's happening in the rest of the city just doesn't matter, right? What matters more is what's happening in our immediate little community. You guys already know that. So other excitement from the weekend. Again, sorry to hear that, Anthony. That sounds challenging. I also had a pretty quiet weekend. Lots of Zoom events, talking to friends on the phone and stuff, which, is kind of fun, kind of not. I don't know. It's kind of not as much fun as it could be. It feels a lot like, yeah, of course. It feels a lot like what we do here in a way, right? And so as much as I do have fun in this class in particular, I guess the main difference is I get to drink beer when I talk to my friends on Zoom, and I don't generally drink beer when I'm in class. No, let's say I never drink beer when I'm in class. So that's basically the difference. Okay, well, maybe I'll remind you all. I was just telling Brendan and Leo that I'm going to scold everybody in a minute, but before we do that, let me remind you all that by looking at the syllabus, I can put a little fear of God into you, is we have an exam coming. So I know you guys are all overloaded with exams and you're busy and stressed out and whatever. And as much as I would like to relieve your stress and not be a cause of it, today I will be a cause of it because we have an exam in a little more than a week and a half, right? A week from Thursday. So I'm going to put a review sheet together for you. I will send it to you before next class, or at least that's the plan. I should be able to do that. And then we can go over it starting on Thursday and then really have a more detailed review session on Monday. And then we'll have the exam. So it'll cover everything we've done so far. If you're thinking, Bill, what can I do right now to prepare? Is read this book, right? So this is what we'll be doing for the next few classes until the exam. It's sort of a difficult book, right? I'm assigning 30 pages. I would argue it's easier to read than the really dense, difficult academic reading that was only 12 pages. But at the same time, if it takes you like 2 or 3 hours to get through this, you're on the right track. If it takes you 3 or 4 hours, then we can talk about reading strategies. So yeah, it takes time. It's a different kind of reading than you usually do. This is why I'm asking you to get the physical book, because if you're sort of always scrolling through whatever, you're reading on your device, you get a little pop-up, you get distracted, go over there. One of the joys in life is it's a rainy day, you have your warm beverage, you have your comfortable chair, you're reading your book. I don't know if you guys ever do this, but it's delightful, right? It's what life is all about. So I really encourage you to take some time, right? To take some time with this book. Any questions off the bat? Again, we're going to talk more about the exam next week, but I just want to give you a heads up, or sorry, I should say next class, but I just want to give you a heads up that it's on the horizon. We all good with the exam? Chat, you guys good? Okay, well, just so we're on the same page, that's what's up. Exam on the way. Okay, so Ramayana. Again, it's one of the two, this is just review from last time to just kind of get the ball rolling today. It's one of the two major epics. Extra credit after the test. Kevin, are you already planning to take an L? You got plenty of time, brother. Got to visualize here. There will be extra credit, yes, but at the same time, don't plan to take an L. You know, it's too early to admit defeat. Yeah, so it's an epic, right? We talked about other epics, Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey, right? So this is an Indian epic. It's just like the Greek epics, but on the other side of Eurasia. It's attributed to the sage Valmiki. You don't have to know that, but it's sort of like Homer, right? Homer told these stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so Valmiki told this story. It takes place in a real place, in a real part of India called Ayodhya, if you're curious about kind of where people talk about this story. And it's probably around 2,000 years old. So it's a little bit later than the Iliad and the Odyssey. But it doesn't mean that some of the stories in here are not earlier. Does that make sense? So somebody put all these stories together around 2,000 years ago, but they could have been drawing from even older stories too. So the history of it, the precise history of it, it's kind of hard to say. And this is something I just wrote, just a quick recap. You've got Rama, you've got Sita. Those are the two guys on the cover here, right? Rama and his wife Sita. We'll talk more about her today. And they have other companions here, some monkeys. There's this monkey who joins them. There's this guy, he's Rama's brother. His name's Lakshmana. So a lot of names. That's one of the challenges of this book. And it's one reason we talk about it in class, right? Because in class, I can help give you pictures and sort of tell you about these figures. And they are on adventures and struggling to defeat Ravana and his demonic armies, right? So I introduced you to Rama and Ravana last time, so you got kind of a sense of who the main good guy is and who the main bad guy is. Some other things, we talked about avatars, right? What is an avatar? I know it was several days ago, and we've had a whole weekend between then and now, but this is an important thing to know about. So we have Rama is an avatar. Yeah, Anthony's got it. He's a manifestation of a god. So Rama is an avatar of who? Vishnu. Eric's got it. Very good. Very good. So that means you guys were taking notes, you were paying attention. Do I expect you to remember every name of every god? No. I'm going to give you a list, right? I'm going to give you a review sheet for the exam where I'm going to say which gods I do want you to know, which ones you don't need to know. Do I want you to know Vishnu? Probably. Actually, I'm just going to come out and say, yes, you do, because this is a book about Vishnu in a way, right? This is Rama coming down as Vishnu. Vishnu is the preserver, right? So if you think about life has creation, we're born, right? We're created by our parents. There is a God of creation. You don't need to know him, Brahma, but you don't need to know that. There's the preserver who kind of keeps us, protects us, keeps us safe. That is Vishnu. And then there's a God of destruction, of death, of the end, and that is Shiva. And you don't need to know him. But so Vishnu is the preserver. He's one of the most important gods in Hinduism, arguably the single most important god. So again, he's a good one to know. And he is, in some ways, the main character of our story, right? As he came down to earth as Rama. What about Ravana? Who's Ravana? You guys remember anything about him? So I've given you a little bit here. He has demonic armies, right? What did we say last time about him? He's almost like a god.
I think he is the powerful guy who got his power from the God and who turned to be.
Sorry, I dropped you at the end, Drisa, but I think you got most of it. So he's a powerful guy who is almost like a god, but it's important to keep in mind he's not a god. He's actually fighting against the gods. The gods are fighting against him. He's a demon, right? To put it very simply, Ravana is a demon. Anthony remembers that he has the 10 heads, right? And so that's one memorable way to think about him. He's not always depicted with 10 heads, but that's one way you can remember him. And he says he's a former Brahmin, so that's good. He's actually not just a former Brahmin, he is a Brahmin. He's a Brahmin, he's a demon, he's not a god, and he's the bad guy of our show. So we won't talk about him again until probably next class. But it's good to know. Yeah, he got his power from Shiva. Very good. So those are a lot of details. I'm glad you guys got it. Sounds like you took notes last class. That's very good. Hopefully the video helped. Oh, and one thing, yeah, I want to talk about too is with the book, some reading strategies, right? If you're reading through this and you're having a really hard time remembering who is who, again, taking notes is key. One reason I like a physical copy of this is because I can write in the margins, I can underline things, I can write at the bottom. I can be an active reader, and it's much easier for me to remember, right? So if I had to take an exam on this, then I could remember things a lot better. So that is how I like to read. Again, I'll leave it up to you to make the final decision about how you read this. Another thing you can do is there are summaries on YouTube. Look them up, right? I don't want to pretend like there's not this vast amount of resources out there. The only thing is the summaries, the exam will not be about the summaries. The exam will be about this, right? So if you watch a summary and then read it, you will understand it better, right? Because you'll have sort of the context. So if you want strategies to sort of understand it better, use the tools at your disposal. You'll find names you don't recognize, look them up. Find the YouTube explanation. I know that is probably an easy way for you guys to learn. It's an easy way for me to learn, right? And you'll be able to find them. I'm not going to send them to you because I feel like the main thing I want you to know is in here, right? And what I want you to really practice is reading. But if you need like a crutch, if you need a helper, they are out there for this book. They won't be out there for everything we have, but they will be out there for this book. Okay. Other things from last time. This is actually a very good overview. Does that sound good? So now, I've been talking about this book. Why don't we bring it out? So I told Brendan and Leo I was going to shame a bunch of people. I'm not actually going to shame you because I'm not as pissed off as I was. But last class, it came to my attention that a lot of people didn't actually have this book, right? So one thing I want to make clear is this is not a translation. This is a retelling by someone named R.K. Narayan, right? And I asked you guys to get a physical copy of the book at the beginning of the semester. It's come to my attention that many people have not because they don't want to pay for money for books. And, I understand that. But at the same time, I've asked you to get this copy of the book. And if you can't get this copy of the book, you need to pay money for it. That is how books work. If you talked to me 3 weeks ago, I could have helped you find one in the library. That is also how books work. But of course, now it is too late. Exam is next week, right? And so unless, you basically, you need something. You either got to go to the bookstore and buy it, or you got to get an online copy that's probably illegal. But I'll leave that up to you. If you need the book, tell me, and I will try to help you. But you got to have the book, right? So I'm not going to force you all to like take a selfie with it right now or something, but I am emphasizing that it will be an open book test. And if you don't have the book, you are just quite literally shooting yourself in the foot right now, right? You are making it impossible for yourself to do well on this exam. So that all being said, that's my grumpy pretext. Does anybody have any questions about the book and how to get it and that sort of thing? Again, this is something we could have talked about at the very beginning of class, and I thought I was pretty clear, but maybe I wasn't. Any questions from anybody? Okay, good. So forgive me for being grumpy. Like I said, it's sort of a holdover from the last class where I had a little heart attack when nobody actually had a copy of the book. So let's talk about Mahabali. Now, this is a frame story. You might have noticed that the beginning, the first chapter in particular, is full of these frame stories, right? We had Tataka's story, we had Mahabali's story, we had Ganga's story, and we had Ahalya's story. So they came kind of back to back, and it was basically like the teacher was teaching Rama all these different stories, right? And we don't have time to go over all of them. We went over Tataka last time, and so that was pretty interesting. You guys remember who she is? Who is Tataka? Am I spelling her name right? Tataka? I think I am. Who's Tataka?
I think she's the woman who uh, who has been killed by Rama when she attacked them on the way with the guy. I don't know the name. I don't remember the name. They was going for sacrifice, and that lady attacked them, and Rama killed her.
Yes, perfect. Yeah. So, and we can go over the details of that again if you're interested, but Drissa explained it very nicely. Rama shoots her, very scary looking lady. So that should be pretty clear, right? Now, right after that, the teacher says, "Hey, Rama, let me tell you a story." And this story is important too, and I'll tell you why. Is because it's sort of foreshadowing for what is yet to come in this story. So again, these are frame stories. They're kind of nestled inside of the larger stories. Does that make sense? Have you guys heard of frame stories before? Is that a familiar term? Like high school English class? Um, they don't show up that much, I'm going to be honest. I feel like it's sort of an old way of doing things. Can anyone think of an example? I can't think of a good example from like Western culture. I read too much Eastern stuff. But in any case, what does it mean? Is there's this larger story, right? We have the story of Rama, and then within it, one character says, "Hey, I'm going to tell you a story." And then so that is framed by this larger story. Does that make sense? Like a story within a story. And then they switch over to the new story. So that's what's happening with this story of Mahabali. One reason I want you to know it is it's sort of it encapsulates a lot of themes from this whole book, and so we can kind of see it as a microcosm. You guys heard this term? Microcosm for the book as a whole. It symbolizes the book as a whole. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's check it out. It is this guy named Mahabali. Why don't we turn to it again? We got our books out. It starts on 13 and then it goes into 14 and 15. And then it's done. Yeah, so it's very short. It's just like 2 pages. And Mahabali is this upstart. Maybe that's a good word to know too. He takes over the world, right? So this is just a regular English word, but it means someone who has risen suddenly to wealth or high position, especially who behaves arrogantly, right? So we got this guy, Mahabali. He takes over the world kind of violently. And so the gods look down on him and they think, you know what? This guy is causing some trouble, right? Again, I'm looking at 13 now. All the gods who suffered in their encounter with Mahabali arrived in the body, blah, blah. And they basically asked Vishnu to help, right? Is this familiar? Have we seen a similar thing happen where somebody takes over the world and then all the gods assemble together and say, Vishnu, please help us? Yes, that's what we saw last class, right? So here we see it happening again. And so in response, Vishnu comes down as an avatar. What is his avatar in this story? What is, say it again. So he took birth in a Brahmin family. Is that what you're saying? Brahmin? Oh, as a pygmy. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I just couldn't hear you. Yeah, so it's sort of a funny little scene, right? They use different words. Pygmy is the one that Leo found. Where are you looking for that? Oh, in the list of characters. Okay, so that's back here. Okay. Okay, so that's helpful. I'm looking at 13 though. So here on page 13, it says Vishnu took birth in a Brahmin family as a person of tiny proportions. right? Which is sort of a pretty polite way of saying, a little person, right? They use the word dwarf here, which I think is kind of more offensive. So I hope I'm not offending anybody by using that term here, but that's what it says in the book. A dwarfish man is what they call him also. So he's a little person, right? He comes out, he's a Brahmin, right? So he has sort of a holiness to him, but he's this little person. Mahabali sees him. Yeah, nobody answered in the chat. Okay. Mahabali sees him and he thinks, hey, holy person, you look really nice. You look very holy. Welcome to my kingdom. What can I do for you? Right? He's a very generous guy. He wants to sort of show off his wealth. And he says, let me do you a favor. What can I give you? And the little guy says, oh, I don't want to impose on you. I don't want anything. I don't need any gifts from you. And then the king's like, no, I insist. Please, 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 let me give you something. And then the little person says, okay, how about a little land? And so then the little person says, how about 3 steps of land? He says, I'll take 3 steps, and then, whatever I cover with those 3 steps, can I just have that area of land? And Mahabali thinks that's a weird request, right? Because it is a weird request. He's thinking this is just going to be some tiny little piece of land. He's like, are you sure you don't want more than that? And the little person says, no, that's all I want. And so he says, okay, fine. And they agree to it, right? They don't exactly shake hands. They actually put a drop of water on each other's hands, which is kind of interesting. And so in any case, they pour the water, they make the deal, right? They sign their names. They don't actually sign their names. But once the contract is signed and, everything's drawn up, it turns out that Mahabali is not just a little man, right? So what is happening in this picture? How does this story conclude? So this is the little man, right? But he doesn't look so little anymore, does he? What happened?
I'm gonna guess that he's a giant, so his 3 steps are really bigger than what the guy thought it would be.
Exactly. That's a good guess, Amma. Yeah, so he turns into a giant. And as you can tell, here's Vishnu in the background. So he's sort of like revealing himself to be this god. He turns into a giant form. He takes 1 step, it covers all of the earth. He takes another step, it covers all of heaven. And then he's already taken back everything there is to take back. And he says, hey, Mahabali, where should I put this 3rd step? And so this is Mahabali, right? What do you think Mahabali says? Put it on my head, right? If there's no other space available. Vishnu raises his foot, pushes him down to the nether world, is what they say. And again, feet and heads and that sort of thing, right? Purity and pollution, that's all operating here. So what does this have to do with the Ramayana? Well, we've got the upstart who is challenging the social order, right? Do we have one of those in the larger story of the Ramayana? We do, right? So that's checked. We have somebody coming in and restoring the social order. Do we have that here? Absolutely. And in fact, it's the same person or the same God, we can say, is Vishnu. Yeah, exactly, Jen. So is Vishnu restoring order? One thing we'll see is the Ramayana is actually quite a bit more violent. This book has more wars and fighting and stuff. Would you say that this is violent? I know it gets a little violent at the end, but even the seemingly violent move that Vishnu makes is only after asking for permission, right? He sort of asks for a request. So would you say that this is violent? So how do they restore order? How would you describe what happened here? It's a little hard to put it into words. What do you guys think? It's not through violence, right? What is it through? The pipes are coming to life. I said, if not through violence. So usually if somebody takes power and we want to take power back, we will use violence to subdue them, right? You smash them and you take what is yours. That's usually how the world works. But that's not how it works here, right? This is not a particularly violent act. Actually, Vishnu comes out as a very small, kind of unassuming person. Doesn't he? Right? So why does he do that? How would you describe this tactic that the gods are using to take power back from Mahabali? Deception. That's a great word. Yeah, thank you. That's the word I would use too. Deception. It was a trick, right? It was a trick. It was a trap. It was a scam, right? They tricked him. It was deception, exactly. And so it's important, right? It goes to show that this is a theme where an upstart challenges the social order, tries to take more than what is given to him, and then the gods come in and put everything back the way it's supposed to be. And if you imagine history, does that sort of thing happen in history? Are there ever upstarts who try to take more than is given to them? Can you think of examples? You said Gaddafi? Yeah, that's a good example. There are a ton of examples, right? Anybody who tries to rise up. I mean, a very famous one is Hitler. Didn't he try to take more than what was given to him? Absolutely. Who rose up to challenge him? The Allied powers, right? That's just one very famous example. Gaddafi is another example. You could think of moments in your family, right, where you get older and your parents get even older and sort of weaker, right? You get more powerful, smarter. You try to take power from them, and then they smack you down, right, and tell you to know where you belong. No, maybe your parents are nicer than some other parents. Is that hand there? What's up? Yeah. Can you connect that here? Why not? I think we could do it. I think that's a great idea, in fact. Thank you for bringing it up. So, Leo, if you guys can hear him, Leo said 3 aims of life. So that's duty, success, pleasure. Do you see any of those happening here? Let's think about Mahabali. What motivates Mahabali? Is he looking for pleasure? Success, absolutely, yes. And you might even say success at the expense of duty. We don't know much about him, but you can assume if he's taking what is not given to him, he's probably stepping on somebody's toes. You know what I mean? There's probably someone he's disregarding, he's forgetting about. He's thinking, I want to be number one. I want to be the most successful. Now, what do the gods represent? Again, they represent the established order. We could say they are, on the side of duty and justice and virtue and all of those other ways we could describe that pursuit. And duty wins, right? The established order wins, as they often do. They don't always, right? Sometimes the upstart wins and they become the established order. We've seen examples of that too. This country, in fact, is an example of that, isn't it? But yeah, so that's an excellent point. And that actually leads nicely into our next topic. Any last thoughts on this before we move on? Yeah. Yeah, duty, justice, the good guys, right? The good guys win in the battle of good versus evil. But again, I like Leo bringing up the 3 aims because, going for success is not always evil, right? We think of Hitler as evil because the whole, Holocaust thing, that was pretty evil. But, was Gaddafi evil? Maybe. He's probably greedy, right? Maybe he's a jerk. I don't know if it goes as far as saying he's evil. And there's something similar with Mahabali. Mahabali is actually kind of nice, right? At least from what we've seen, very generous, right? So it goes to show this duty, success, pleasure. It's a little more complicated than just good and bad, right? Good and evil. So yeah, excellent. All right, let's do some more of that. So I made a worksheet for you. There are a lot of women in the Ramayana, even though I would argue that this is definitely a patriarchy. Women are all over the place, and I thought we could spend some time thinking about that. So I've made a worksheet for you. Here's the link. And just like Leo was bringing up, the big question is, how are women depicted? But yeah, where do duty, success, and pleasure come in within that depiction, right? So here are a bunch of women that I would like you to think about. They mostly show up in kind of segmented chapters. Tataka, we talked about last time. Drissa summarized it very nicely. Ahalia, we have not talked about yet, so she shows up very quickly toward the end of that first chapter. Sita, mostly chapter 2. Queen Kaikeyi and Kuni, that's pretty complicated stuff. we'll try to go over that today. And then Saponica, we probably won't have time to get to, but if you do have time, we can cover that as well. So here are some major important women. And the big question is just, how are they depicted? And then where do these three aims show up in their depiction? So Leo totally saw what was coming. Any questions about this? Now you guys are going to do some work, and I'm going to break you out into rooms to discuss these topics. You guys have any questions for me before we do that? Recording going. Okay, hi everybody. So I've got some slides to use to illustrate these points, but I want to let you guys share your reflections and maybe lead the conversation a little bit. So what did we talk about? I'm curious to hear from Brendan and Leo, but why don't we start with some folks in the chat to begin with? How are the conversations? Anybody want to share what you came up with? Hello, hello. Come on. Who wants to share? See, this is the thing about breaking out into groups, is I know you have something to share. You must have something to share. Tataka we talked about last time, and I find that one's as much fun as it is to repeat old things. Why don't we do something new? Did anybody talk about Ahalya? It is the one who turned to stone. Kevin wants Dr. Bill to share his thoughts, and that's very flattering that Kevin wants to hear my thoughts. Frank does too. Okay, you guys you're good at flattering me and trying to trick me into talking, because I do like to talk. I don't want to downplay that, but I want to hear you guys talk first. So if nobody in the chat wants to get involved, Brendan gave a nice little piece of information. I am on to you, Frank. I'm on to all of you. I have eyes in the back of my head. I have eyes in all of the breakout rooms. I know what you're doing when you're sleeping, when you're awake, even bad or good, to be good for goodness sake. Chat, Ahalya, what's her deal? Or Sita, or the Queen, or any of the other ones. Ahalya is stone until Rama passes. Okay, Eric's got it. Very good. When we think about how women are depicted in the Ramayana, what do we learn from this Ahalya story? Why was she turned into stone? And again, you don't have to know this off the top of your head. You have the book to help you, right? We can go to page 19, look it up. It's actually a pretty disturbing story. I don't know if you guys noticed that. It's totally messed up, yeah. And I could use some very disturbing words to describe it, but I'm trying to be polite in class. It's a goal of mine, is to be more polite. She had an affair by accident. Yeah, that's a very polite way of putting it, because she quote unquote cheated. That's also a polite way of putting it. Good. So yeah, so what's the deal? We've got this woman, and I know it's difficult because there are all these names to keep track of. Maybe I'll hit the lights in this room to see more clearly. She is a beautiful woman. She's married to a sage named Gautama. You don't have to know him, but here he is talking. That's her husband. And they're living a nice life, right? They're having a good time. And then one day, the god Indra is feeling kind of horny, right? He sees this beautiful woman, and he sees that her husband has disappeared. And so he sneaks in, he turns himself into a cat, and he turns into a cat at the end. He sneaks in, pretends like he is her husband, right? He puts on the facade, he makes himself look like her husband. They sleep together. And in terms of things like consent, I know consent is a major conversation in America today. Hopefully you guys have had a conversation about this too. There is sort of a weird moment of consent here where she surrenders herself, but at some stage realizes the man enjoying her was an imposter, right? So this is, again, a very, very stretched idea of consent. She is not necessarily aware that she is sleeping with someone who is not her husband, and yet at the same time, she eventually figures it out when it is too late. So I like the the way that Eric put it, an affair by accident, and the way that Jen put it, she quote unquote cheated, although she did nothing wrong, right? She's totally blameless in this whole thing. At least that's how I'm reading it. And then, of course, her husband comes back, blames her, turns her to stone. What does her husband do to the god? This is actually worth thinking about. What does he do to her? I wrote it on here, didn't I? Yeah. Yes, he covered her in 1,000 female marks. And again, I'm trying to be polite, but I think this one I can't be polite about. What is a female mark? It's a vagina. So again, the god turns into a cat and tries to sneak away, and the husband says, "I know you. Your obsession with the female is your undoing. May your body be covered with 1,000 female marks, so that all the world may understand what really goes on in your mind all the time." His punishment is to cover him with vaginas to show the world what the god is always thinking about. Pretty outrageous. And then I think he lightens it up and turns them into 1,000 eyes, like eyeballs. And he is the god of 1,000 eyes. You can find depictions of Indra where he's covered with these eyes, but we all know the truth, right? We all know why those eyes are there. Okay, very good. And then what happens when Rama shows up? I don't think I have a slide for that. No, I don't. She turns back into a human, right? And so we get a sense that Rama is almost like this magical healing force in the world where he shows up and she turns back into a human. And here she is. What have we learned from this? How do you guys interpret this? What have we learned about women in the Ramayana from this? So these are all good comments. She was tricked. She, she was involved just by accident. She had no idea really what was going on. There is this moment of quasi consent where it says she surrendered herself, which again is not by most definitions of the word real consent. And yet she gets blamed. Why does she get blamed? In a way, she is. Yeah, I mean, they're both held accountable. Indra gets punished, she gets punished. But even though I would argue she's a victim, and I'm sure a lot of you would agree with me in saying that, hopefully all of you, she's still being punished, right? And we can put it in this language of duty, and that almost makes sense. But in the end, it doesn't, right? It doesn't make sense. So it just goes to show that this is a patriarchy where the men tend to make the rules, right? And sometimes women are blamed for things they can't even control, right? And that seems to be how it is. And yet, here's Rama kind of making it better, right? Here we see Rama being this force of forgiveness, right? What does he say? I think on the end of 21, yeah, so she comes back, becomes a human, and he says, "May you seek and join your revered husband and live in his service again. Let not your heart be burdened with what is past and gone." Now, her prize is to go back to her husband, which is not a great prize, but he's also, within this patriarchal system, Rama is being kind to her. Can you see that? Right? He is releasing her of her punishment and saying, just go back to normal now. Other thoughts on this? Again, it's a very famous story, the story of Ahalya. You could see maybe another version of this where she is a bit more to blame, where she actually does something wrong. But of course, here, again, she is really quite blameless. And I think Rama sees that and restores her, back to normal, right? Back to being a human. All right, so we got 20 minutes left. Did anybody talk about Sita? How is Sita portrayed? What's the big situation with Sita? So she's mostly chapter 2. Eric says free Sita. Say again. She's pretty ideal, right? Why do you say that, Leo? I agree with you.
He was saying that, and I said, oh, I wouldn't be gone.
Mm-hmm.
Obligation to, I think it's carry out when the wife has been gone, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So what is ideal about her? How does she conform to those expectations? So, for example, again, we can kind of keep going through this. We don't have to go through every detail, of course, but now we're looking at chapter 2. We've got this wedding. They see each other. Do they even talk before they get married? Do Rama and Sita talk to each other? They don't. They see each other. They see each other. And just from seeing each other, right? Rama sort of catches her out of the side of his eye. She's like up in a balcony or something. Just from seeing each other, they become like sick with love. You guys ever been lovesick before? Where you're like so into somebody, you're just like, oh, I'm so hot right now. Is anybody else like hot right now? You can't sleep, you can't eat, you're just thinking about this other person. We see that happening here. Yeah, she felt ill, right? And it goes on and on about that. And of course, love is never so simple. There are certain things that they have to do. What does Rama have to do? What is going on in this image? That's obsession, not love. Oh, well, we talked about this before, right? I gave you guys an assignment about love. Love is love is a powerful thing. It can turn to obsession for sure, but I think if they get married, I would still call it love. Maybe it's obsession when it's unrequited, perhaps. So what is this giant thing going on here? I wrote Rama strings Shiva's bow. What is this talking about?
I think the Sita father he put the condition for Rama to marry his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So he said that he have to lift this bow in order to marry his daughter, and the bow was so heavy, but Rama was so powerful that he was able to lift the bow and break it, and by this, and the hand of Sita,
Perfect.
And get married.
Yeah, exactly. And so maybe you've heard stories like this, like in Robin Hood. You guys know Robin Hood? Like to marry the fair maiden, he has to win the archery contest. Or in the Odyssey, right? Doesn't Odysseus have to win some archery contest to sort of prove that he is who he is and get married to his wife or return to his wife? So we see these same kind of themes across the world where people have to prove their worth. Men have to prove their worth before they can actually marry a woman. And just like Drissa summarized really nicely, it's this giant bow. And I've never really strung a bow, so I don't really know how it works, but it's supposed to be really huge, like probably even bigger than in this picture. This one doesn't look so impressive. But you got to sort of bend it, right? You got to bend it down and then put the string on it. You got to be really strong in order to do it. And Rama is so strong, not only is he able to string it, he breaks it. He is so strong, he just totally crushes the event. And of course, they get married. So just like Leo was saying, there is a sense of duty happening here. What do you guys think? How is duty being portrayed here? Because there is this really strong lust, right? It is lust. They love each other. They want to be together. And like Zamo said, that could turn into an obsession, but I think it's before that. This is just like raw emotion. And the question is, what do they do about it? Does Rama run up to a room and say, I love you, baby. Let's do it. No, he doesn't, right? He's got to go through all these steps. He's got to prove himself to the father and win her hand in marriage. And only after that do they finally get married. This is duty in operation, right? It's putting duty over your various desires, your various urges, and saying, I'm going to do the right thing, or at least the socially acceptable thing, right? I'm going to do what is expected of me and follow these various rules. What about the depiction of women? How about Sita? Thoughts on her, the way that she's depicted?
They show her to be a very beautiful girl.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And so one way we could think about her is she doesn't really have much of a personality. She's very beautiful. She's treated a little bit like an object, right? It's just like she kind of moves from being associated with her father, right? And again, this is traditional society. So within this duty relationship, Her father takes care of her. She's part of her father's family. And then she transitions to being in her husband's family. And she has very little time as an independent person. And so, again, maybe that is contrary to our modern values, but that is how most traditional societies work back in the day. So it's worth at least noting that. Okay, we still have a good amount of time. So let's talk about this really complicated chapter. Chapter 3, Queen, chapter 3, Queen Kakei. So what groups got to this one? This is probably the hardest one to get all the details straight. So we should definitely talk about this. We'll probably take at least a majority of the rest of the class. Who talked about her? Anybody?
I think, that name I don't know how to say it. I would say KKE.
That's fine.
She was one of the wife of the king, and so she's friend with Kuni, and she's also mother of the prince. How is his name? Bata. I wrote it down somewhere.
Yeah, Bharata.
Bharata. So her friend Kuni convinced her that if Rama become king, she will not be treated well. So she convinced to convince the king to send Rama in exile, so her own daughter could take power to inherit the king.
Her own son. Yeah, exactly.
And that's what happened.
Perfect. So Drissa, that was excellent. I'm very impressed. And so just to summarize some of Drissa's points, it was really very nicely stated. Lots of different characters, all these different complicated relationships. But I think we're up to the challenge now. We know who most of these people are. This is the king, King Dasarata. This is Rama's father. We've seen him before. He was the one in the video who was praying to have his son. Remember that, right? We've known him for a long time, actually. So this is Rama's father. This is not Rama's mother. It is his father's wife, but his father has several wives, you might remember, right? So this is the mother of another person, just like Drissa said. And she wants her son to be on the throne. She's Rama's stepmother, so she has some responsibility for taking care of him, but she is not Rama's biological mother. So I think that's a good place to start. And just like Drissa said, she starts to get this idea that if Rama takes the throne, that will kind of be a threat to her, right? And it's worth thinking about, why is that? If Rama takes the throne, why is that a threat to her? What happens to her if Rama takes the throne? She's no longer the queen, right? She becomes an ex-queen, a past queen, right? Why is it better for her if her own son is on the throne? Yeah. She'll have some power, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know, have you guys seen Game of Thrones? Is that familiar? So there's a similar dynamic there. We don't have to push it too hard, but we can just make a general statement. In this royalty system, we might always think the king has the power, right? And that is often the case. But imagine a young king, right? Let's say her son is 10 years old and he's sitting on the throne and she tucks him into bed every night. Is she going to be able to influence her son's decision making? Absolutely, right? It's basically like she is the king. She won't be the king in name, but she'll be able to kind of pull the strings, right? She'll be able to influence the decision. So it's actually huge. It's a lot of power if her son becomes the king. And so that's what she wants. And just like Drissa said, that's what she gets. The husband, King Dasarata, what does he want? Who does he want to be the king? Does he want Bharata, the son of Kaikeyi, to be king? He does not. Who does he want to be the king?
Rama.
Rama, right? Because again, Rama's the perfect man. He's the ideal king. He would be the best for the kingdom. The king knows that. Even Kaikeyi knows that, but she has her own reasons, right? And so here's a conflict. We have a conflict now. Why don't we look at what I use to kind of map this conflict out? This is my argument. It doesn't have to be this way. There are other ways to think about it, but I think this is kind of helpful. Maybe we can work through it together to try to make sense of it together. So how is Kaikeyi going for success over duty? Would you guys agree with me on that one? Oop. How is she going for success over duty? What is her duty? What would you say is her duty in this situation? Okay, why do you say that? Yeah, there are a few different ways to talk about it. I think you guys hit most of them. So if you couldn't hear, we're saying that it's her duty to let Rama be king. Why is that? One reason is what her husband says, right? That might not be very satisfying, but it is a patriarchy. He is the king. She has to listen to him. It's her duty to listen to him. Number two, he's the better king, right? Rama is the perfect man. It's one of those situations where it's not ambiguous. It's very clear. Rama is better. And so as her responsibility to the kingdom, right? She's the queen. She should put the best person on the throne, right? It's her social obligation. So a lot of different reasons, but instead she's going for success. How is she going for success? We already talked about that, right? She can be more powerful if her son is on the throne. This one's harder. How is Dasarata, that's of course the king, how is he going for pleasure over duty? Did you guys notice that as a theme? Can anybody answer that question? Pleasure over duty for the king?
Yeah, I think he has failed on his duty because he let himself being manipulated by his wife.
Mhm.
It wasn't his intention to accept that KKE, I don't know, KKE,
Mhm.
that, yeah, the other boy who took over the power before Rama came back. It wasn't his intention to accept that, but he got manipulated by his wife. So at that point, he failed, to his duty of a pleasure.
Very good. Yeah, nicely stated. And so just like Drissa was saying, the king's initial intention was to put Rama on the throne. Again, his duty as a king, as a father, would be to take care of Rama. But as a husband, he needs to listen to his wife. And so why is he listening to this wife in particular? Eric said very nicely, she's his favorite wife. He has multiple wives, but when he saw her, he was already married. But when he saw her, he was just like, oh my God, she's so beautiful. What do I have to do to marry this woman? And he made a promise to her family, to her father. He said, look, let me marry your daughter, and I will make her child the next king. He already promised this, right? He promised it because he was so attracted to her. Kuni, again, this friend, like Joshua was saying, friend of the queen. She said the old bridegroom, which is of course talking about the king, was intoxicated with the spectacle of Kaikeyi's beauty and youth and was prepared to promise anything. So he's made all these promises to her. He's like, yeah, I'll make your son the king. I'll do anything for you, baby. Just marry me. Please marry me. And then later he also makes other promises to her. He promises two boons. This is from a slightly different scene, but I'm going to bring this word boon up because we'll see it again. What is a boon? You'd offer me two boons long ago. This might not be a word you've ever seen before. It's kind of like an oath. Yeah, it's like a blessing from a god. It's a thing that's helpful or beneficial. It's a favor or a request. So this is actually the archaic use that we're using here. He promised two favors, two requests, right? So she can ask him for anything and he will do it for her. He didn't know she would ask for this, but here we are, right? That's the situation he got himself into. So what does she ask for? Idrissa already said she wants Rama to go into exile, right? Which means to go out into the woods and leave the kingdom for 14 years. And she wants her own son on the throne. And of course, the king is caught, right? He's caught between his different duties. And so what happens in the end? What does he do? Does he agree to send Rama into exile?
I think Rama also, when Rama was informed of what happened, he decided himself to go
Mhm.
to the wood.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's maybe another surprising takeaway, right? It's very common throughout history. Again, I'm sure you can come up with examples of this where brothers fight each other and even kill each other over the throne, right? It's very common. Here, Rama is not doing that, right? Why is he agreeing to go out into the woods? Because his parents asked him to. He's like, okay, twice 7 years, 14 years, no problem. Be really easy. He's talking about his father. He wants me to go away, dwell in the forest in the company of saints, and derive all the benefit therefrom. That's a pretty positive dude right there, isn't it? His dad is sending him off into the woods for 14 years, and he's like, what an opportunity. I'll go get packed, right? He's on board from the beginning. And one way we could think about that is because he's holding duty over everything else. He's holding duty over success, over pleasure. Is it pleasant to go out in the woods? No, not at all, right? But he doesn't care. He's ready to do it because his dad asked him to. Now, just to be clear, the king agrees. He holds his promises to be true, and he ultimately dies. He dies, we could say, of a broken heart. I don't know what to say. Rama leaves and his father passes away because he is so distraught at his son leaving. And we have 2 minutes. Okay, so maybe one more scene. So Rama, Sita, Lakshmana, that's kind of where we're going to pick up next time. Lakshmana is Rama's brother. Again, I know lots of names, but I think if we see the pictures, they're easy to remember. Here's Rama, here's Sita, his wife, here's Lakshmana, this is his brother. So he has lots of brothers. Only one brother goes with him. They go off into the woods. And Bharata actually chases after him. Here he is touching his foot, right? We know what that means, don't we? What does it mean to touch someone's foot? It's in the movie, right? Why would you do that? What does that do? Right. Exactly. It is a bow. He's bowing very low, showing respect, saying, I'm lower than you. Please come back. Bharata is a good boy too. They're all good boys. Bharata is saying, come back, be the king. You're a better king than I am. And they both are being very polite and sort of arguing about it. And how does this scene end in our final minute of class? The gods come out and they finish it. So on page 61, it's the very end of chapter 3. The gods come out. Let's see, the gods watch this argument. We can kind of skip that. Then they say, Bharata, go back and rule on Rama's behalf for 14 years. And then, after the gods show up, you kind of have to listen to them and things go on. So if we sort of recap this situation, it's actually really complicated, right? We could blame Kaikeyi for being so dramatic, right? And demanding all of these boons and looking for success over duty. We could blame her. We could blame the king for making the promises in the first place and putting pleasure over duty. We could blame her friend because she kind of convinced Kaikeyi to make this move in the first place. She wasn't going to do it in the first place. We could blame Bharata maybe for being greedy, but he made up for that in the end. We could blame Rama for maybe trying to take the throne a little too quickly, right? There are all sorts of people we could blame, but in the end, it's really fate that decides, right? The gods come out and they say, this is how it has to be for the story to continue, right? So it's quite a jumble of things, but I think we were able to sort it out really quite nicely. We did not talk about Surpanaka yet. We'll talk about her next time. And so, yeah, we'll just call it a day then. So any questions before we sign off? How's that all sound? Feeling good? Okay, so yeah, again, if you have problems getting the book, let me know. You need the book, right? There will be an exam about this book, so please do get the book. But it looks like a lot of you guys have it, so maybe I'm getting worried about it.